So just to start off, this is one of my very favorite quotes personally, and something that was cherished by my granddad very much. Age is like a ladder that takes you to a high. It gives you a lot, but it brings in a lot of uncertainties as well as certainties. So I have always preferred to use the term not so young rather than using old, because it's a continuum, and I think it's universal. 30 years down the line, I might be listening to this rather than telling about it. uh, this has been one of our favorite slides all the last year, the world tour of COVID. Now we are just coming out of the second wave, and I'm hopeful that the case positivity rate will decrease. But a lot of times, probably you have heard about people talking related to how COVID has led to a lot of psychological problems, social problems. How I have perceived working in the field of disaster psychiatry over last more than a year is that it has also opened our eyes to a lot of things. There has been a lot of discourse on mental health, psychological health, well-being of the elderly, but then it's very unfortunate that we needed a pandemic to open our eyes to that, something which was long due all the while, at least in our country. I mean, just to give you a perspective, the National Mental Health Survey that was conducted by NIMHANS in 2015 to 16 showed that 1 in 6 person has any form of psychological problem. That increases to 1 in 5 when you consider people above 60 years of age. And the treatment gap is 85%. What is the treatment gap? So if 100 people are suffering from any kind of mental health related issue, then only 15 of them get the proper care. 85 of them don't. And now that's just the picture of urban India. Very less of the rural representation is there. Now, one thing is, there may be categorical diagnosis. Some person might have depression, let's say sleep problems, schizophrenia, dementia, things like that. But for every person suffering from a diagnosis, there are hundreds and thousands more who are suffering from distress. A lot of you might be, very worried because your children stay away, because you are not able to meet your friends, your peers, at least in the initial part of the pandemic. You're just worried because morning to night, the only thing that you look at media is deaths and destruction. You're worried about the cases, you're afraid of getting infected, your domestic health might not be coming, and you might spend sleepless nights. You may just feel distressed, feel restless, you're not able to go out. If I put you under the rubric of scientific diagnosis, no, you will not meet any of them. But are you in the best state of mental health? No, you aren't. The problem is, in our country, people consult doctors only when they feel that the threshold is crossed. But just always I tell this to my audience, that mental health, or a good state of mental health, is not just having the absence of a disorder. It's a state of well-being when, in spite of stress, you're able to work according to your satisfaction. Is stress harmful? No, it isn't. It helps us. It gives us an opportunity to probably exert more. If stress was not there, none of us would have been able to perform in exams, go through difficult situations. None of us would have been able to age. But probably today I'm going to talk about, at what point do you realize that the stress is going to get extended to distress, and that is what is harmful. So we all face stress. There can be different reasons for that, related to relationships. I'm sure many of you will appreciate now, in the context of COVID, there have been role changes, work from home versus work for home, gender differences in roles, changes in control. Many things have not been in us, the way wanted them to be. We have lost support. There have been deaths. We have lost many of our loved ones. There have been economic changes and struggles, change in responsibilities, separation of families, and so on. And frankly, if I just go around asking if you have if you have faced stress during the last 1 year, I don't think anybody will really tell no. But if you ask how you have dealt with stress, then the answers become different. Just talking about personally, there was a point of time when every day going to the hospital, I used to feel that today I might bring back the virus. And I would actually like to stay separate, stay alone, because at every point of time, I was thinking that I shouldn't be the reason why somebody else gets infected. And that also brings in a kind of self-stigma. And I'm sure many of you who have been infected with COVID have faced this kind of social stigma even. And that comes out of fear. And that's a major cause of stress. So what is distress? Stress beyond a point of limit. So when it starts affecting your day-to-day work, you start feeling unpleasant for a long period of time. It affects your physical complaints. Let's say you don't have sleep, your appetite goes down, you are not able to do what you want to do, you are not able to interact with people as you wanted to. That is a thin line between stress and distress. And that is probably the time when you need to seek some sort of help. And loneliness and grief also fall in the same spectrum. Are they normal? Yes, they are. We all feel lonely at some point of time. We are all grieved at some point of time. We have faced bereavement at some point of the time or other. But how to deal with it and when to decide as to when you need to take professional help is something we are going to look at today. Now, what can be the physical complaints? In people who are above 60 years, many times the pressure might increase, your sugars might get beyond control, a lot of headaches, you feel sense of restlessness. It can go either ways. You have either too much sleep or you do not have sleep. There is a lot of sweating, anxiety problems, sexual problems, heart-related issues, where you suddenly have gross palpitations. And most importantly, and something which is very, very important in the elderly, is you have difficulty in focusing. You tend to have memory problems. Now, the moment you have memory problems, you might think that, am I having dementia? Though that's totally a discussion of sometime else. But let me just tell you that stress, anxiety, and loneliness can bring in immense amount of concentration problems. And that does not mean that you are having a per se brain complaint. But the moment that is treated, your attention comes back to normal. So that's one of the earliest signs. How has COVID affected us? These are probably only a few. I'm sure that if I discuss with you, there will be n number of other reasons. Primarily uncertainty, grief, loneliness. Many of us, I keep telling this to many of my so-called younger patients or caregivers, that let's say I know so many people for whom when the lockdown started, having an evening walk or having a morning walk was the only form of recreation that they ever had. That was the time when they met their friends, they met, the local people. And one fine day, an infection comes and you are restricted from going out of the house for a walk. Why? Because people tell you that you are old, you are above 60 years, you have a high risk of contracting the infection, and you should stay inside. And trust me, many families, even with the best of the interest, the decision of the older people is not taken into account. It's an imposition. You will not go out or you will not do this. In many places, people have called in our helpline and told, Dr. G, our domestic help is not there. The person who helped us is not there. I'm not able to go out because the police is telling me that, at this age, why did you come out? You can catch the infection. I'm afraid to go out even with the mask. So in all these, what happens is the basic human rights, right to freedom, dignity, autonomy get compromised. You might ask me, is safety more important or is it autonomy more important? Of course, safety is. But I think information and decision making done together and involving all the family members equally in a particular safety protocol is more important than imposing certain rules and laws. And I'm sure all of us have faced that media and information has been an overload for us over the last 1 year. There was one point of time when I was simply afraid to even log on to the net. Because the moment I used to, there is thousands of medical related information about COVID, so much so that being a doctor, even out of academic interest, I was frustrated. So I think all of these are different dimensions of how the pandemic has affected us. I just thought that I'll share, two of the live experiences that I had, and you will see that in both, in one, a gentleman told me that you keep telling that I should not go out, and you keep telling that I'll practice social distancing. But look, here is my wife. She's with a stroke, and there is nobody to help her. So if I do not go out, if I do not bring her medicines and bring the basic amenities, what kind of distancing do you expect me to practice? I didn't have an answer. You know, medicine doesn't have an answer in its present form for these social problems, especially people who stay in old age homes, who are probably not so privileged. They are at an increased risk. There is overcrowding. They are not able to see their children, their family. Many people are not very expert in telecommunication. Video conferencing has become a norm, but many of us, including, so many of us have so many technical difficulties. And you cannot simply one day hold over and just tell that you start being tech savvy from today. It's a major change in lifestyle, and that's again what brings in loneliness and brings in different kind of stress during this pandemic. This is obvious. It's not to say that all people above 60 years have complaints, but most of us do. So, for example, there are medical illness, pain, lung problems. Many are on multiple medicines. Sleep problem is very, very common. There are issues with mobility. There are issues with memory, hearing concerns. Of course, age itself will bring in some changes, but then each of these become vulnerabilities when you are living during a pandemic situation and when you're feeling lonely. Imagine if your hearing is not properly corrected, if your vision is not properly corrected, then even the telephonic, the video devices will not be of much use to you if you are attempting to stay in contact. The various issues that aged people face include illness, loneliness, misinformation, what after me issues, especially people who are staying alone and who are afraid of dying alone. Many such instances have come to our notice. And finally, there are issues with, especially when I talk about grief, and I'll come to this later, a very common notion is grief just means that people are dying or I have lost someone. Grief can also happen due to a loss of role, loss of a power hierarchy in a family, loss of your own autonomy, of your dignity. It can happen if somebody is abused, and it can also happen if you have lost something extremely important. I mean, I just remember that there was a gentleman who had come to us. He was not talking for almost a week, and the family had brought to us. He had lost his wife due to COVID a month back. And, we never knew what was the reason for his depression, his sadness. And then finally, when he spoke, what he told was that there was a major change in his living pattern. And, besides his wife, he had to sell his cattle. He couldn't take care of his garden, which majorly his wife used to do. And his lifestyle had a major, major change to such an extent that he felt that if his wife would not have gone, his life would have stayed probably intact. So it was grief of losing the wife, grief of losing a lifestyle, grief of losing a routine, grief of losing the meaning of life, which becomes so much inherent at this age. When we talk about grief, especially in the pandemic situation, I have heard a lot of talks, or a lot of my colleagues and friends telling that why don't you do the morning rituals over video conferencing. And I'm sure you have seen that a lot of times rituals, customs have been done over teleconferencing. But just tell me, how many of us are used to mourning or doing the rituals over over video or over a screen, when you cannot really hold someone's hand. You cannot be beside someone, but only thing is you can stand in front of a screen and see it. It's easy to tell, it's easy to share these solutions because that's the only thing that we have in hand now. But it's not very easy to really do it in practice. And just think about people who live in rural areas. I mean, even people who live in urban areas. It's just one fine day you have to grieve digitally, and it almost sounds like a joke. So pandemic has taken away a lot of things from us. It has taken away gatherings. We use the concept of social touch. I mean, we have basically done some ongoing research on this concept, and the extent of social touch becomes very important, especially after the midlife. A gentle pat on the back, a handshake, just the warmth of somebody being there becomes immensely important, which cannot be probably replaced with digital methods. And also the circumstances, a lot of young people have died in the second wave, and there becomes immense survivor's guilt in many people. I mean, many of us have just broken down. Many of them have called us telling that, my son, 25, 30 years have gone. Why him? Why my daughter? Why not me? And that becomes an entirely different context of grieving, which can become very, very difficult. And social support, again, it's very difficult in the pandemic times to basically be there with one another because of the norm of social distancing. So this is just something in general for you to understand, that depression in old age is not just about feeling sad. It can have a lot of components associated. And if you feel that it's happening with you or it's happening with anyone else, please make sure that, you at least have, you encourage the person to take medical help, or you talk to the person and ask what's happening. Commonly what happens is, again, as I mentioned, concentration problems, a lot of fatigue, loss of appetite, feeling emotionally distant, just becoming apathetic. Somebody who was very, very much interactive just stops being interactive one fine day. You tend to become extremely concerned with your health issues, pain increases, you tend to isolate yourself. There are a lot of negative thoughts that keep coming in. And these are just some manifestations that can happen. Remember, loneliness is not depression, but loneliness is a major risk factor for proceeding into severe mental disorders with age. When we talk about grief, now these are the usual stages. Psychologically, when we talk about it, I've just kept it in very common language for you to understand. So initially, there is a shock, there is a lot of self-blame, there is yearning for the person or for the thing that has gone. A person may or may not go into depression. That depends again with the circumstances, support, followed by finally a lot of uncertainty, sadness, and acceptance of the loss, which happens eventually, and then life moves on. But as simple as the graph is here, every one of us faces grief in a unique, individualized way. And this graph is probably an overgeneralization, but I'm sure that when each of you talk about your experiences, there will be unique ways of how you have dealt with grief. In terms of loneliness, there are two different kinds of factors. Inherently, some people are not interactive. Some people are introverts. So it becomes difficult for them to probably go out and mingle with people. Versus, there are certain external factors. So let's say somebody is stranded, somebody is living alone. And remember, for loneliness to happen, it can even happen in a busy crowd. It can happen in a social gathering with people all around you. Loneliness is not always about having people in your immediate physical proximity. It also means emotional connection. You can be emotionally lonely in spite of staying in a family of 20 members. So when you do not feel that connection, when you feel yearning to probably talk to people, when you feel that you are just too preoccupied with yourself, that is when loneliness sets in. A very important distinction of loneliness is solitude. Many of us like solitude, but probably what differentiates them is solitude is voluntary. Sometimes I love to stay alone at the end of a busy day. I don't want to be disturbed. Versus there are certain days when I feel that it would be good, if I just pick up the phone and try talking to someone, that will just make me feel better. So there is the difference between both. Now, loneliness is very common in later life. Slide that you're looking at on the left is taken from the International Association of Geriatric Psychiatry. And it's very recent data. It's a data of 2020. Now, numbers apart, what I just want to tell you is it's an unrecognized problem. Many of us just feel that, okay, chalo, that's okay. Once in a while, we just feel like that. Many times I've heard people telling, it's normal to feel lonely with age, which is a big myth in our country, especially. But how loneliness can make you feel is, there can be immense of effects. There can be helplessness, emptiness, anxiety, feeling that you are alone, and that sense of helplessness, that can be extremely distressing. Now, how do we deal with it? How do we adapt our emotions, which is the main area of our talk? First, it's very important to take a step back and accept stress. I always strongly believe in this fact, not because I'm a geriatric psychiatrist, but because I've seen this in my family, in many other motivating stories of seniors. Age brings with it immense amount of wisdom, experience, understanding, and acceptance. In fact, I just want to share this with you, that many of the large studies done all over, scientific researchers have shown that in all these psychological, social problems that we keep talking about every day, people above 50 years are much more resilient than the younger ones. Does that mean that they are immune? No. Probably they are more vulnerable, but they themselves have a lot of capacity to deal with it. And here comes the concept of healthy aging. Now, there are several aspects to healthy aging. One is being able to do what you want to do, nurture your hobbies, involve in, probably what we call as post-retirement life. Second, staying physically and mentally active as much as possible. And both of these factors are protective for your memory decline. Third, having healthy familial connections. And finally, the last one might seem a little philosophical, but I'm sure all of you will agree with me on that. At least having some purpose to your meaning, some purpose to your existence, some purpose to your life. You had all along, but now you start recognizing. And, a very good concept of healthy aging is that it brings with it a lot of positive effects. Sometimes your sugars can be controlled without medicines. Your BP can be controlled simply with physical exercise, with yoga. The memory problem, even if it has started, if you are, interactive, if you are physically active, if you are healthy, otherwise, of course, with age, some changes will come. Probably you will not be able to move as fast you used to move. You'll not be able to speak and think as fast. But yet, if you have confidence on yourself and if you have a good social network and some sort of physical activity, that will help you immensely, irrespective of your age, whether it is young, old, or older, old. Coming back to social distancing, I think we always tell this to people that with whatever technological expertise you have, stay connected. And one very important aspect of it, and I thank Silver Talkies for this, is that it's research proven. It's my own personal experience, as well as it's from a lot of people whom I see, that social forums like this, where seniors can connect with each other, can connect with people of different ages, can meet, discuss, chat, sing, have fun, involve in storytellings, have some community programs, they are immensely helpful, especially during these times. In fact, pandemic has taught us a lot of lessons for futuristic crisis, and one of which is how effectively we can use our social media platforms, not for information, but how we can use them to stay connected. The first thing to overcome loneliness or to overcome grief is, if you are physically safe, you can consider thinking about the other things. So, there's generic things, because I'm a physician, I'm a doctor, I'm talking to you. I think I have to tell you these. Try to maintain as much as possible social distancing. However, you can actually take a walk in your immediate proximity with the usual precautions, especially now with the second wave slightly coming down. Avoid any form of self-medication. This was a major concern when hydroxychloroquine came out. Now with, a lot of things for against remdesivir, home treatment, and things like that. Ensuring you have a nutritious diet, adequate sleep. Do not visit hospitals unless it is really necessary. I'm sure that every single hospital is offering teleconsultation. Any kind of elective surgeries like cataract, hip replacement, osteoarthritis, any kind of hearing aid implantation can wait. Unless emergency procedures, it's really not needed as of now. This is imperative. I think uh, we all have to do this. If you really want to know any COVID related information, there are 4 sources which will cover everything. The World Health Organization website, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, CDC website, the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, India, and finally, the Indian Council of Medical Research. Everything is there, trust me. So when a simply forward comes in your WhatsApp telling that who has told that this thing is going to happen, this many people are going to die, this new strain of fungus has come, this virus is going to infect you, stay calm, take a break, go to the website, check if it is authentic or not. Do not forward, do not believe in what comes in social media. In spite of me telling this repeatedly, sometimes I myself end up doing so, especially those who are in isolation and quarantine. And this is going to be again a potent problem when probably the cases may increase a little bit after the lockdowns relaxed. Uh, the pandemic, at least personally to me, has given me a lot of chance to go back to my old habits, to try and rethink relationships, to revive certain skills, and spend a lot of time with families, virtual meets, something which was long due. A lot of people have turned greatest cooks, people have become poets. Many of my friends, many of my patients have written the best of the stories, and they never knew that it's there in them. But the pandemic has brought all these out. And if you feel that there is an urgent distress, or if you suspect that there might be any form of elder abuse or any kind of abuse for that matter, uh, I will be sharing the NIMHANS helpline with you shortly. There is also Help Age India, Age Well Foundation, the Alzheimer's Related Disease and Related Society, ARDSI, and they have their individual helplines which are available on the internet. Few things I would want to point out, that these are called red flags. So if you have sadness persisting for more than 2 weeks following a loneliness or a grief, excessive physical complaints, increase in pain, destabilizing of sugar and BP, a lot of decreased interaction, immensely decreased sleep. You're not able to sleep for more than 2 to 3 hours a day. You are waking up very early in the morning, having memory problems, having a constant sense of fidgetiness, restlessness, and very importantly, have thoughts of self-harm and death wishes. These are called red flags. So if you face any of these, or any of your person known to you faces any of these, please take professional help on priority. And I repeat, these are urgent measures and indications for urgent help. I think it's pretty self-explanatory how loneliness can affect your health. A lot of people take to, taking sedatives, taking alcohol, taking a lot of medicines. Being in the medical field, it's unfortunate, and I always admit this, that the more you change doctors, your medicine list keeps getting increased. And at one point of time, you end up taking 3 herbal supplements, 2 medications for multivitamins, 3 painkillers. And half of the time when people come to us, the first work in the first 1 or 2 weeks is decreasing the number of medicines. And many times, as I told you, having a regular, at least some sort of routine, physical activity, any form of physical activity. If somebody is doing yoga, if somebody is happy with meditation, pranayama, just walking for 30 minutes, 20 minutes, deep breathing, relaxation, anything is fine. Doesn't matter what form of activity you are practicing, but it helps. It's as effective as your medicines. But the only problem is, in spite of we all knowing this, sometimes the medicines get a higher priority than these basic lifestyle changes. I just like to share this tier model of grief, and it's a very, very simple model. First of all, there is no right or wrong way of grieving. It's extremely personalized. I'll share a story with you, and this is something which I'll never be able to forget. There was this, this lady. who came to us, and she basically had come with a lot of physical complaints. And on asking on inquiry, she told that she had lost her husband, and what happened is she was psychologically fine, but her BP had shot up. It had really soared high. So when we were discussing with her as to how you really did cope up, and not only did she cope up with the grief, she also tried to manage her children who were actually in a worse state than her. She told that there is a very old banyan tree in their yard, and the only way that she used to cope is she used to go to that tree every day, sit under it, and talk to her husband. Why? Because there was a belief in their ancestry that any person who expires, the spirit resides in that tree. And she always thought that my husband has nearly level left me. My husband resides with me in the same house. It might not be applicable to many, but this is an example where the traditional things that we always talk about, the format that sometimes we prescribe, they come and teach us as to what is the best way. And it's a beauty to listen to them, because many times what we read in our traditional textbooks and what we come to know from you all, you know, I sometimes really wonder which is probably more important to our medical career. So the common form of model is the tear, where T stands to accept the reality of the loss which comes with time. E is experiencing the pain when you are feeling helpless, when you are feeling that you are yearning for someone, when you are repeatedly going back to those memories. Do not feel bad. That's a process, that's normal. Cherish it, and that will help you in the next step to adjust to the new environment. There will be a change of role, and then finally you can reinvest in the new reality. When you talk about these, it might seem that it's probably a little bit generic, but as I said, it can be extremely individualized. But if you talk to, let's say, 1,000 people, there will be a common train of thought of how grief passes. And this is just that kind of model. Some of these components are universally accepted among all. And probably when you are facing the grief, the best way is to fall back on whatever sources of social support you have. Share the loss. The good old saying that sharing a loss makes it lesser is very, very true in terms of grief. And you know what's the best healer? Time. No matter whatever you do, if you do not give time to yourself, for some it might need days, for some it might need years, for some it might never be resolved throughout life, but they might go back to the way they were probably functioning. That is how grief resolution happens. Uh, when the grief goes to form a depression, when you feel extremely sad for prolonged period of time, your food habits, your sleep gets affected. Yes, there is effective treatment. There are medicines. There is counseling, which we call psychotherapy. In extreme cases, we might need to try out brain stimulation. And of course, lifestyle changes, exercise, nutrition, and staying connected with your loved ones are as good as treatment as the other forms. All of you can note down, this is the Nimans helpline, which is operating, which we had operated during the first wave as well. Now, this helpline is exclusively for mental health concerns. If you are above 60 years old, you will be directed towards the separate geriatric helpline, which operates within the same number. And, one of the first thing is, it's not just about yourself. Sometimes it can be your neighbor, it can be your family member, it can be your spouse, it can be your parents. If you find this among any, if you are able to help even one person seek proper care and proper mental health care treatment, that 85% treatment gap of a survey might get reduced. Just few do's and don'ts before I end my talk and presentation. It's always better not to pop in sleeping pills on your own. Do not stay emotionally isolated. It's better to at least engage in some sort of routine and some sort of activity. I know that a lot of routines have been helter-skelter because of this work from home thing. But as much as possible, it's always better to have some sort of structure to the day. And physical mobility and walking helps immensely. As I already mentioned, stay away from misinformation, decide one or two authentic sources and stick to them. And one thing which, beyond any literature helps us is hope. If hope was not there, we would have not been today in this virtual meeting talking and discussing with each other. Just few easy dictums. We have discussed all of them. One thing which I've underlined here is love yourself. If you take care of yourself, charity begins at home. There is the first step where you can curb loneliness, where you can deal with grief. Self-care, understanding your own needs, catering to what you like, having a favorite dish, listening to your favorite song, dancing to your favorite tune, enjoying to the favorite storybook, anything that you like, it starts there. And then it moves on to whether you are able to deal with further stress or whether you'll be able to help others. Uh, I think this will be a very apt opportunity because 15th, a few days later, 15th June, is designated by World Health Organization as the International Day of Elder Abuse Prevention and Awareness. Um, we will be writing in different forums, and I'll be happy to share them with you as well. But remember, elder abuse can be overt or covert and is a very, very common problem in our society. And the first and the most important thing that we need to do as seniors, we need to be aware that it exists. Reporting should be prompt. And sometimes the caregivers themselves do not understand, as I mentioned right in the beginning, that even restriction of autonomy, restriction of finances, neglecting a person is also a form of abuse. And under the Maintenance of Senior Citizens, Parents, and Maintenance and Welfare of Parents and Senior Citizens Act 2007, you can all go and check this out. Abuse and neglect is punishable. So if you are facing, or if you know somebody is facing, HelpAge India is a very good helpline which caters to this, or you can inform the local authorities. No form of abuse should be tolerated in any form. And 1 in 6 person average globally faces abuse. And trust me, that's gross underreporting. So these are just some of the physical signs, how you can know that if somebody is being abused, especially a senior citizen. But it's always better, especially if somebody in institution, old age homes, you are meeting after a long time, somebody who stays alone or somebody who stays with probably a distant relative, it's always better to have an antenna open for that. Finally, I think we will end this by thinking that self-care is a best form of first-line defense. Stay resilient, stay hopeful, understand the difference between the stress and distress, and remember, aging doesn't make you weak. It gives you a different form of strength. It's just the other form of telling you are not so young, but you are probably more than young. You just have accumulated enough to stay resilient in the times of stress. This gentleman has become extremely famous thanks to COVID. Albert Camus, who had written about the plague simulating the pandemic long time back. And this has been one of my favorite one-liners. Seniors can go through every plague, be it emotional or physical. Thank you. I hope I have not overshot, and I hope I have not bored you.
Absolutely not, Doctor. Thank you so much for that very insightful and impactful talk. So we have a lot of questions that people have put in. So we will start taking them now. So the first one is, of course, about the stigma that you talked about. Our society has this stigma that visiting a psychiatrist and taking medicines is seen as negative or abnormal. How do you see this? How can society start thinking of this as a part of life?
Yeah, so see, I think one of the interesting things that came up in the National Mental Health Survey was that people immediately equate psychiatrists with medicines. And I would really take this opportunity to appeal to all of you that not all of us will take a prescription pad immediately and prescribe you drugs. No, we'll not do that. That's not about what mental health is. First of all, it is important to understand that if a person has 5 medicines, one for diabetes, for hypertension, for BP, for thyroid, for prostate, and for depression, very unfortunately, the first medicine to be stopped is that for depression. I don't know why. So people in general tend to think that the other medicines are probably safer. Medicines which are given by psychiatrists, or so-called the psychotropic medicines, they're associated with habits of addiction. A lot of people have fear of addiction. They might influence my health in an adverse way. They might make me dependent on the medicines throughout my life. I might have, I might fall. I might feel excessively sedated. And trust me, all of these are true. But then it's also very important that we discuss with the doctors, doctor, what medicine have you given me? How many days should I take it? How many days later should I consult you? What are the side effects I can expect out of these? And as a rule, most of us will be discussing these with the patients. And if there are times, for example, if somebody has severe depression, you need medicines. If somebody's sugar is shooting up beyond 200, you need medicines. It's as simple as that. If somebody has hypothyroidism, you need medicines. But that doesn't mean that medicine is the one and only form of therapy. If your doctor feels that no, you don't need medicines, like if you have a mild diabetes, or if you have a borderline sugar level, what will your doctor tell you? Just walk, change diet, do some yoga, follow a diet chart. You don't need medicines. Similarly, we'll also tell, just undergo counseling, be regular in counseling, adapt some lifestyle changes. You do not need medicines. So I think the myths about how psychotropic or psychiatric medicines act plays a major role.
Thank you, doctor, for clearing that misconception, myth, if I may call it. There's a question. In fact, there are two questions. I'll ask them one after the other. If one is completely committed to rational thought and cannot seek solace in religion or spiritual processes, how does such a person deal with his or her loneliness moments or days?
Yeah, that is why one of the reasons is I specifically didn't mention spirituality in my whole talk. Because it is an extremely helpful way of dealing with both loneliness and grief. But again, it is highly personal. Somebody who hasn't been spiritual for 60 years of their life or 70 years, one fine day, you cannot prescribe spirituality. So let me now go back to a little and tell that rational thought can be explained in very different ways. You can be an atheist, you can believe in God, you can believe in something else completely different, you can believe in karma. But what is more important in this case is it starts with self. The very basis, in Hinduism, everything starts with Om. And again, it starts from self. It's, what in Christianity you call Dai. It's all the same thing. So even if you are not spiritual, you will see ultimately, ironically, it merges in the same way, that it all starts at the place of self-care. So when you start taking care of your basic needs, your diet, what you love, what you like doing, if you feel like, just going and helping someone or being philanthropic, some people get solace in that. It's not important that it has to be connected to some religious connotations, as long as that keeps you happy and that keeps you healthy. That's why I said that there is no one single way of grieving or loneliness. It can be extremely individualized. If you are not a religious person, you do not have to practice any religious things just because of the advice of someone else. Deal with it as you would want to deal with it, period.
Thank you, doctor. In fact, related to that, a question has come to me. Is psychology like spirituality, and can a combination of both be used to guide us? I think you've answered quite a lot of it.
Yeah, I think, again, I should mention here that when I talk about yoga, when I talk about any form of physical exercise, let's say Tai Chi, Chinese medicine, Qigong, lot of things related, they are not exclusive to any particular religion. In fact, very, it's many people are surprised, and they when they hear this, that one of the very well-known yoga centers, the main two persons who are the teachers, one is a Buddhist and one is Islam by religion. So yoga or a physical exercise has no religion. It's not connected with spirituality. That being said, psychology deals with human expression of emotions and how we deal with emotions. Spirituality also deals with the same. if you are a spiritual person, if you like, there can be different grades of spirituality. Somebody can be just, somebody just reads religious texts. When we use psychotherapy, there is a specific form of psychotherapy which involves Gita, which involves the teachings of Bhagavad Gita. So we will not deal with this with everyone. Let's say somebody who is not a person who follows religious texts. I'm sure many of you have heard about Freud. A lot of them give examples of Greek mythologies and Oedipus complex and things like that. I personally have found that when I talk about Krishna or Arjuna to somebody, they resonate much better because we have been hearing about these from our very childhood. So Greek mythology might seem foreign to me, but knowing about my own mythological characters might make me very easily accept the fact. But again, it depends to the extent of how much the person sitting on the other side of the table is able to take it. And if the person is somebody who is very religious, you deal with it in that way. If somebody is not that much, you deal with it based on the person's preference. Don't push the limits. That's all what we tell.
Thank you, doctor. There's a question on what is the difference between anxiety and depression? Is that something you'd like to answer?
That's something which we have been trying to answer throughout our career. It's very confusing in terms of scientific terms. It's distinct, but to put it very frankly, depression is something that happens when you are sad or when you have a loss. Anxiety is something that happens when your loved one doesn't return in time to your house and you see that his or her phone is switched off. You can resonate what emotions happen. That's the very basic difference. Anxiety spectrum, there are different disorders. Let's say somebody who has phobia, somebody who has phobia of heights or phobia of dogs, somebody who has OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, has to clean or wash multiple times. Somebody who has generalized anxiety disorder, morning to night, continuously fidgety, restless, not able to rest even a bit, versus the mood component, somebody who is sad, who is not getting interest in things. The person who is anxious will enjoy if you play a serial or if you give him or her a book that the person likes to read. A person who is sad will not like to do that. And always remember that in old age, these two are so inseparable that almost 90% of people who present to us with anxiety problems, they are actually depressed.
Okay, all right. I'm going to paraphrase this question. So, because of the pandemic, there are elderly couples who are home on their own, and not both of them may not have similar interest. One of them may have mental health issues. So if, how do you handle it then? So the question is from a person who's asked, I'm not able to handle all this in this situation. So though he has enough engaging hobbies. So how do you manage and balance such a situation?
Yeah, so I'm not very sure as to by not being able to handle what he or she means, because it can be different facets. Let's say somebody is not able to handle it physically, that I'm not getting enough sleep, I'm not able to have enough food, I'm feeling fatigued. It can be I'm not able to handle it psychologically. All my things are going fine, but somewhere down the line, every day I do not feel like I used to feel before. In any case, if you are doing everything that is under your control and you are still not able to deal with it, the best thing will be to take the help of a mental health professional. Again, that doesn't mean that you need medicines, but you take professional help.
Absolutely. We all need to remember that. So what purpose, is a question from Sushma, what purpose can we have at this age? Can you please guide?
Oh, that's extremely individualized. I think your purpose is your own. As I told you, like grief, there is no right or no wrong purpose. Sometimes even not having a purpose is a purpose. So don't worry. It's not necessary you need to have a purpose. If you ask me for now, I think it's very difficult for me to decide, because with the COVID pandemic, the first purpose we now have is to treat patients.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. The other question is, children of emotional parents are they likely to hit anxiety problems?
Yes, they are. In one word, yes. But again, that is not universal. So it doesn't mean that if there are 100 parents with emotion, again, now I think I need to answer this by telling what exactly you mean by emotional. All of us are emotional, isn't it? If you mean that somebody who is excessively emotional, somebody who has significant issues with attachment, somebody who is extremely anxious, then yes, their children, and it doesn't mean that it happens genetically. So it doesn't mean that always a person who is anxious, the genes will be transmitted. You should also remember that the upbringing of the children and how they have seen their parents behave and interact plays much more important role than genetics. So it's not universal, but to give you a rough estimate, let's say if we are talking about 100 parents here, then at least 15 to 20% their children will have some sort of anxiety issues.
Thank you, Doctor. We are also streaming live on Facebook, so I'll take a couple of questions from there. Is there any, is meditation spirituality? Is one of the questions that has come there.
Very tough question. In one word, it's not. But if you are meditating with a specific release picture in mind, if you were to part of a ritual which is involved with puja, or let's say, uh, any kind of religious ritual, then yes, it is. But meditation can also involve just sitting silently, observing your thoughts, which is called mindfulness. It can involve relaxation, deep breathing. None of these have anything to do with spirituality. This can be practiced by any person, anytime.
Thank you very much. There's a question from Dr. Prasad. What are the prerequisites for a perfect relationship to be established between a counselor and a patient?
The most important is rapport and time. Sometimes I do this mistake myself. The faster you have your first session, the lesser is your rapport. So I think that the main important requisites are that the first session goes well. When you're first going to meet the person, both the sides of the table are on some sort of same page, which we call the therapeutic contract. So I go to a session knowing that, okay, this is what I expect out of my counselor. And the counselor or the psychologist or the psychiatrist knows that I have explained the goals to my patient or to my client, and they know that what they can expect out of the subsequent 5, 10 sessions. Many times